So that being said, let's jump into the message here this morning. Have you ever been caught up in a job or a task so much so to the point where you kind of barrel through other people? Whether it's a physical barrel through or a metaphorical barrel through. I know I have, and I was actually thinking about this, and there was a time where I took on a job that really lent itself to this. When I was in high school, I wasn't a giant fan of the 9-to-5 full-time job throughout summers. It drove me nuts. So what I tended to do was pick up odd job sort of things. So I would mow grass for people, and I would do all these little tasks. And one summer, one of the things that I had the opportunity to do was to work on a farm. Just briefly, it wasn't anything major, but the farmer needed help with hay during the hay season. So I'm like, you know what? I can do this. Plus, I saw the extra benefit of this is going to be a great workout for football season. Because if any of you have ever worked with helping with hay, it is not a real light-duty job. I mean, there's a lot of weight involved, and you're chucking hay bales and stacking them up, and it's hot, and you have to wear long sleeves in the hot weather, because if you don't, you get all itchy and gross. And really all I knew was long sleeves, bring a water bottle, and it's going to be hard work. So I go to this farm, and I go to help with their hay, and I was working with two of the farmer's grandkids. So it was me and these two grandkids, and we are unloading these wagons full of hay and putting them in the barn. And that barn was probably like 200 degrees. It was brutally hot and stuffy, and yet all the hay dust. And I was treating it like a workout, though. I'm like, you know what? I got to get ready for football anyway, so let's just hit this thing. So I was just going nonstop, grabbing hay bales, throwing them off the wagon to the pile, and just going back and forth and back and forth. And for probably like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, I was just hitting this thing as hard as I possibly could. Every once in a while, I would look at these grandkids of the farmer and go, man, these guys aren't slowing down. How are we going to keep doing it? And just keep going and going and going, because I didn't want to be the one that made them work slower. Well, we finally finished that wagon. The farmer brings up a second wagon of hay, and I'm like, oh man, okay, this is tough. I knew farmers worked hard, but let's go. And I go to climb up onto the back of that wagon, and one of the grandkids go, hey, hold up. Can we take a break and get some water and relax for a second? I'm like, oh, definitely. Thank you so much. Like, I'm dying. And so we're standing in the shade drinking water, and one of the grandkids looks at me and goes, hey, so with this next one, can we take it a little easier? Like, we don't usually hit these things as hard as we are right now. Can we just take a break? And here I am thinking, I don't want to slow these guys down. And both of them like, the only reason why we kept going is because we didn't want you to make us look bad, because we're the farmers. You're just some kid that showed up to help us. See, I was so focused on the job that I was doing that I didn't pay attention to the people around me. I would glance at them, and the fact that they kept working made me think, oh, that must be it. But in reality, those guys were probably hurting. They were probably like, need some water, we need a break. And here I am like a thickhead just grabbing hay bales and chucking them on the piles. See, I was just powering through that job and ignoring the people I was with. And I think that we all fall into this same trap when it comes to following Jesus. See, we get so caught up in the task that we're doing, whether that task is serving in the church in some way, shape, or form, whether that task is even just trying to be obedient with our lives and doing the right thing, we get so caught up in that task that sometimes we lose sight of our relationship with Jesus in the process. We lose sight of the whole reason why we're doing it in the first place. As we talk about imitating Jesus today, of learning how to love like him and live our lives the way in which he wants us to, today we're going to have to talk about how it's important that we don't lose sight of where our priorities are when it comes to the way in which we live out this relationship with Jesus. We need to recognize that Jesus needs to be the sole center of our focus. You know, today's a challenging topic for us as Americans, because even though there's a lot of jokes about Americans being fat and lazy, the numbers actually say otherwise. In fact, Americans, we have a really ridiculous work ethic when it comes to things. In fact, most of us will work ourselves to death if we're allowed to. In fact, there was a study in 2018 that said that 47% of Americans did not use all their vacation time in the course of a year. 21% of Americans left more than a week of vacation time on the table. And the primary reason that they gave was they didn't want to fall behind on their work. They did not want to be in this place where their career would suffer, and they felt like they needed to work harder. That's crazy. As Americans, that's something that we live with. The problem comes up, though, whenever that mentality becomes king in our lives. Because what ends up happening whenever work becomes the center of our life, whenever that's the thing that we push, our relationships start to suffer, right? Our families start to suffer, the people around us start to suffer, and not least of these, our relationship with Jesus starts to suffer. How many times have you used the excuse, because I know I have, I'm just too busy to spend time with Jesus. I'm just too busy to open my Bible. I'm just too busy to go to church. I'm too busy to spend time in a circle. I just can't make it work. See, I think that all of us get to that place. We all get to this place where we make this excuse because what's our day look like? We spend all day at work, we get exhausted, we come home and then it turns out, we got to take the kids to soccer practice. You take the kids to soccer practice, you maybe can catch a meal, maybe if you're lucky, and as you make it through all the busyness, you finally get home, you finally get a time of rest, and what do you want to do? Just veg out and watch Netflix. It's so much easier than trying to focus our brains and our hearts in something intentional, right? See, we all get to that place. And the funny thing is this happens even in the context of when we serve Jesus. There are so many volunteers that help out here at Grand Point Church, and we could not do what we do without them. But it is really easy to fall into the trap as you're serving week in and week out and doing the task that you have been assigned. It's easy to lose sight of who you're doing that task for. It's really easy to get to the place where you start to do the job out of obligation instead of out of your relationship with Jesus. And then once again, this ties to our day-to-day lives. This ties to everything that we do because we spend our lives trying to be obedient to Jesus. When you have a relationship with Jesus, you want to do what he wants you to do. You want to be a better person. You want to grow. You feel like you need to do the right things. And so we kill ourselves to try and be better people, and in the process, lose sight of Jesus. This morning, we're going to be talking about how Jesus calls us to copy him, how he calls us to listen to the way he wants us to live. The thing that is most important in our lives, he wants us to make the most important in our life. This morning, we're going to look at what's important to Jesus. And we're going to be talking about how it's important to focus on him instead of everything that we tend to do for him. This morning, we're actually going to be looking at a story that's an interaction between Jesus and a pair of sisters. In fact, it's a story that probably quite a few of you are familiar with, the story of Martha and Mary, one that we begin to look at in detail how Jesus calls this mentality out in our lives. We're going to dive on into this here this morning, and I'm going to read the whole passage so that we can understand what it is that Jesus wants us to imitate. And then we're going to zoom in and look a little bit closer. So if you've got your Bibles with you, we're going to be in Luke 10. We're looking at verses 38 through 42. So if you got your Bible, go ahead and pull them out. The words will be up on the screen. But I'm going to read through this whole passage first, and then we're going to zoom in on it. So starting in verse 38 of Luke 10, it says, "Now as they went on their way, Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. And she went up to him and said, 'Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her to help me.' But the Lord answered her, 'Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her.'" So let's look into what's happening here. We have to kind of look at the background a little bit of what's happening in this whole story. It's funny because in Luke, we've seen all of these pictures up to this point of Jesus doing ministry. He's been going from town to town. He's been serving and teaching and ministering to people. He's been healing people, performing miracles. And he's been doing all of this incredible stuff. And then in the middle of all of that, we get this story that at face value seems a lot less important. We get the story of what seems like the squabble between two sisters, and Jesus is caught in the middle. It's funny because in a series about intimidating Jesus, we're looking at a passage where Jesus is an important part of this story, but it doesn't seem like he's the main character. In fact, if we're talking about imitating Jesus, are we supposed to let people sit at our feet and serve us? Because that's what it seems like in the story, right? But that's not what we're looking at today. What we're looking at is what Jesus finds as important. And he highlights that through this story. So let's take a closer look at this. So Jesus is invited into Martha's house by Martha So Martha has invited him into this house, and she starts almost immediately busying herself with these preparations for Jesus. She is getting things ready. She's most likely getting a meal ready so that Jesus and the disciples can eat. She's most likely preparing places for them. She wants this to be a good experience for Jesus. Meanwhile, Mary is just sitting at Jesus' feet listening to him talk. You've got to realize at this point, the word of who Jesus was, maybe not in a complete understanding way, but this guy who's been walking around and teaching and healing people and doing all this has probably spread. I mean, he had huge crowds of people that would follow him around just to try and get the opportunity for some experience with him where he could heal them, or he could teach them, or he could just have some interaction with them. And here's Martha with this guy in her house. This guy who's had all these big crowds following her around. Here's Martha with this opportunity. And she's so consumed with what's going on with her cleaning and preparations that instead of spending time with Jesus, Martha is consumed by trying to be a good host, by trying to be someone memorable for Jesus. Take a look at what's said here, starting in verse 39. It says, she had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. But Martha was distracted with much serving. Martha was distracted. Man, we have no problem relating to that, don't we? In fact, some of you are probably distracted right now and having a hard time listening to what I'm saying. We have so many responsibilities, we have schedules, we have family to take care of, we have all of these situations that run through our minds. In fact, I'm probably going to say something this morning that's going to trigger a thought, and something that's been haunting you or something that's just going to pull your attention is going to come up, and your brain is going to get distracted, and you're going to pay attention to that, and you're going to focus on that. We understand how that feels, right? And here's the crazy thing. That's just from within our own heads. We're not even talking about all the other stuff. We've got social media that is constantly pulling for our attention. We have our phones that are in our pockets at all times, and they buzz, and other people are trying to connect, and everything's screaming for our attention. We all suffer from FOMO. You know what FOMO is? Fear of missing out. We all suffer from this. We all think, oh man, my phone buzzed, something important's happening. If I don't check it, I'm going to miss something. We are all rather distracted. We get distracted. We understand distracted. That's a huge part of our lives. And here's Martha. She probably has this perfect picture of what Jesus' experience should be. She's looking at Jesus going, man, he's going to love the food. He's going to think, oh, what a beautiful home. He's going to have this great experience. And she's so focused on the experience she's trying to give Jesus that she's not spending time with him. That she's missing out on an opportunity to be with the Son of God. She's so sucked into what she thinks she needs to do that she misses out on Jesus. And then, notice, something shifts. She's going about, she's being distracted, and she went up to him and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. See, Martha, in her distraction, starts to look at other people, and she hones in on her sister and goes, what is she doing? She knows there's a ton of stuff that needs done. Why isn't she helping me? Look how lazy she's being. Maybe she's starting to get a little jealous because here's Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus, and Martha's sitting there going, there's so much to do. Why aren't you helping? And so she voices these thoughts to Jesus. And basically she's saying to Jesus, don't you care that I am slaving away for all of this stuff while she just sits there? Make her help me. Make her help me. That's basically what she says to Jesus. Isn't this exactly what we do? When we start to get to this place where we're trying to either walk out a relationship with Jesus or figure out what this means, or we're serving, or whatever it is we're doing, we start to look at the people around us and going, why aren't they helping out? It seems like all they want to do is love Jesus. Why am I doing all this work? Why are they not living as good as I am? Why aren't they trying as hard as I am? Why aren't they doing as much as I am? Jesus, look at what they're doing. Make them stop it. Or make them do better. Or make them do what I want them to do. We think we know. We think we're the ones that have the answers to all of that. We know what's best. And if we are not careful, we can let all of the things that we do for Jesus get in the way of actually experiencing Jesus. And it impacts the people around us because we start to look at them and blame them for our lack of relationship. Listen to Jesus' response in 41. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. You are anxious and troubled. How many of you feel anxious and troubled this morning? Man, I know I get there. I get there so easy. We get so caught up in all of this stuff, and we start to feel anxious and troubled and worried. All of our distraction leads us to this place of anxiousness. And sometimes it's an issue of control. Sometimes we're at this place where something's outside of our control and it starts to work us up. Sometimes it's a conflict issue where we know we're dealing with somebody and it hurts and it's no fun, so we start to get anxious about the next time we have to see them. Sometimes it's just the overwhelming nature of life. The way that life can pick up and all your responsibilities and schedules and all this stuff gets in our heads and leaves us in this place where we're anxious and troubled. A lot of times it happens from something that hasn't even happened yet. We're worried about something that we don't even know the outcome. And we let that build up. So in the middle of all of our distraction, in the middle of our anxiousness, in the middle of our worry, in the middle of trying to do something about all of this, Jesus comes along in 42 and says, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away. One thing is necessary. Being with Jesus, worshiping Jesus, listening to Jesus. The good portion is Jesus. Being with him. Here's the thing. Jesus is not condemning work here. Jesus is not condemning service. Jesus is not condemning obedience. There are so many passages in the Bible that point us to working hard, doing things with excellence, seeking to follow him with everything that we are. Jesus isn't throwing all of that stuff out. What Jesus is saying is you need to watch where your heart is in all of this. Jesus isn't saying that what she's doing is wrong, but what she's doing is the right thing at the wrong level. She is doing what God calls her to do, serving to the best of her ability, but she's doing it with a heart attitude that's not in the right place. Jesus is saying, don't be anxious, be with me. Don't be anxious, be with me. See, it's an issue of priority. It's an issue of attitude. It's an issue of all of this stuff that we build up in our hearts because we're not prioritizing Jesus over all of the other stuff that we do and all of the things that we get caught up in. See, that's what Jesus is trying to show us here in this passage. The thing that's most important to him is relationship with us. He wants to spend time with us. He wants us to be connected to him. He doesn't want all of this busybodiness if it doesn't point back to him. He doesn't want us serving and doing and trying to be good people if we're not connected to him. He wants himself to be the center. We try and make this passage about worship versus serving, and we work to that, but I think it's a hard issue. I think this is talking about the way in which Jesus wants our attitudes to reflect our priorities. Our attitudes should reflect the fact that Jesus is the center of our priorities, that everything that we do is about an act of worship to him. I think most of us approach life with the same kind of heart that Martha does. I think most of us are in that place where we want to serve Jesus. That's why we start in the first place. But then as we get into walking out the Christian life, we get so caught up in the things that we're supposed to do that we miss out on the things that are most important, spending time with him. So how then do we learn to imitate him? How do we learn to get to that place where our heart attitude is lined up with a worship of Jesus? How do we learn to imitate what Jesus wants us to, the thing that's most important to him? Well, first off, I think we need to take a step back and check our attitudes. And what I mean by that is be able to step out of things and see where is the state of our heart. Where are we focused? Are we focused on Jesus or are we focused on the obligation? Are we focused on worshiping him in everything that we do, no matter what that is? Or are we allowing all of this stuff that we have built up, this list of rules that we have, this list of things that we have to do, get in the way of our relationship with Jesus? We need to check our attitude. My 9-year-old is a master at a teenager eye roll already. She figured it out like 5 years ago. I mean, she is so good at on the second, just boom, the eyes go, and the attitude comes out, and we're just like, kid, you need to check your attitude. And then she always follows that up with a, she's got this grunt, and it's funny because I don't think she thinks that we hear it. Like, I'm not sure what this is, because we'll be like, hey, you need to watch your attitude. Hold up, what did you do? Does it again. It just keeps going. And so the only way for her to be able to understand where she actually is and why that she has this bad attitude is when we remove her from the situation. We send her to her room. When she sits down and has time to cool off, she can start to see, oh, yeah, I probably was having a bit of an attitude there. I can see how grunting at my dad when he's already upset with me is probably not the best move for my safety. That is the way that she's able to shift her attitude. She recognizes where her heart is, and she starts to change. I think that's what we need to do sometimes. We need to take a step back, get out of whatever it is we're in for a moment, and center our hearts back on Jesus. We need to shift our attitude back to what he wants by checking our attitude. See, this is even true for those of us who are doing great things for Jesus. It is so easy to get caught up in it. The number of times I've seen volunteers who do a phenomenal job at what we've asked them to do, they've stepped in, they do amazing things, but as time goes on, they start to treat it as an obligation instead of this act of worship to Jesus. And usually, the work doesn't suffer, the task doesn't suffer, they still do phenomenal things, but they tend to be miserable people to be around because their heart is not focused in the right place. And in those circumstances, I think the most loving thing for us to do is, hey, check your attitude. Watch where you're doing this. Where are your motivations? Maybe you need to take a step back so that you can recenter and make sure that you're doing this for the right reasons. See, I think a lot of us end up in the place where Martha is, where our anxiousness and our distraction has gotten us to this place where we're missing out on Jesus, even while we're serving him. I think I'd rather have a less productive person who is like Mary, whose heart's completely focused on Jesus, than someone who is hyper-productive, but they're doing it out of obligation, consumed by all this anxiety and distraction. One of the ways then that we need to learn how to get to that place where we focus on Jesus, one of the things that we can do is to stop comparing ourselves. Stop comparing ourselves to all the stuff around us. We have the never-ending courtroom in our pockets when it comes to social media. I mean, you pull that thing out, and what do? We go through and we're looking at what people are doing, and we're scrolling and going, man, I can't believe they'd wear that. That's stupid. Did you see what this person said? Oh, man, how dumb. Pause here. Stop saying dumb things on social media, please. I'm tired of having conversations about that. All right, unpause. Anyway. We get to that place, though. We get to this place where we start to compare ourselves with everything around us because we've taken our focus off of Jesus. Instead of looking at Jesus for the comparison, we start to look at everything else around us. And here's what ends up happening. One of two things almost always happens when we work in the comparison game. Either, one, we start to feel bad about ourselves because they look so much better than us, or the opposite, we start to look down on other people and judge them and condemn them because we think we're better than them. See, we've taken our eyes off of Jesus, just like Martha does when she starts to look at Mary instead of Jesus. We need to learn to stop comparing. We need to get out of the comparison game because all that is going to do is take our eyes off of Jesus. We miss out on what God is doing in other people's lives and in our own lives whenever we start to play that game. And when we get to that place, when we begin to understand that Jesus should be the primary focus, it does impact the way in which, though, we interact with the people around us. See, when Jesus is our primary focus, now when we look at other people, we see what he sees. We see people that need to be loved. We see people that we can serve, not out of obligation, but because we love them the same way Jesus loves them. Same thing we talked about last week, being able to deny ourselves so that we can love others before us, only comes when our eyes are focused on Jesus. We actually have a value here at Grand Point where we say we value God's people more than our programs. We value God's people more than our programs. What that means is we never want the job or the task or the responsibility or the things that we do here on a Sunday morning or the nice youth program or the nice kids program or any of that to take precedent over people and loving them in the name of Jesus. We never want this to be a substitute. And I think that when we can keep our eyes focused on Jesus, then that becomes a natural outpouring of our lives. Because our eyes are focused on him. Not on the comparison game, not on the strategy that we try and use, but we're focused on him. And he shows us how to love the people around us. The thing that Jesus wants us to imitate here is the thing that he finds important. He wants us to be with him. He wants us to love him, to worship him. That needs to be the focus of everything that we do. The challenge that I want to leave us with this morning is one that means we have to be willing to look inside ourselves. The challenge that I want to talk about today is that idea of checking our attitude, looking at our hearts, seeing what it is that God wants for us and where we actually lie in relationship to him. And that's sometimes hard and painful. It's not fun to look at yourself in a mirror and realize you're ugly. The challenge that we have is to check our hearts. We need to stop comparing ourselves to other people. If social media fuels this for you, maybe it's time to get rid of it. Maybe it's time to ditch it. It's not worth it. It just consumes our time and our emotional energy and everything that we have. And oftentimes it points us away from Jesus. We need to recognize that all people are in different parts of this journey. And if we focus on Jesus instead of all the comparison stuff, then we're naturally going to learn to love him in that process. We need to put people before all the tasks and strategies and the good that we do for God in our lives. And it all starts with loving Jesus first. That's where we got to be. This is a battle. This is something that we fight through. This is something that's a daily commitment like we talked about last week, dying to ourselves daily. It's a fight. It's not easy. I even this morning, I found myself like having to check my attitude on a couple things because something wasn't done the way I wanted it to be done, and I'm sitting here going, oh, I can't believe that they would let this happen. Instead of just stepping up and doing it myself and taking care of it and serving out of a love for Jesus. This is a battle. And if we focus our hearts on Jesus first and foremost, man, he can do incredible things through our lives. In fact, this morning, as we wrap this service up, we're going to sing this song, My Defense, which is all about Jesus being our defender in the midst of that battle. And if we can focus our hearts on him, man, he can do incredible things. If any of you find yourself wrestling with this idea here today, if you're doing an attitude check and you're looking, you're like, man, I'm way off, and you don't know what the next step for you is, come have a conversation with me. I'm in the back at the end of the service. You can shoot me an email. My business card's on all the tables back there. You can fill out that QR code. There's actually a prayer request form. You can tell us what it is you're wrestling with. Don't try and do this on your own, because as we love Jesus together, it can help strengthen that love and that focus on him. Let's stand together and let's sing this out, that Jesus is our defense.